On a hot July night, Americans learned JFK Jr. had died.
Once again, the Kennedy family is steeling itself tonight to deal with tragedy.
The son of Camelot was killed in a plane crash with his wife Carolyn and her sister Lauren. The man, once a paparazzi magnate and crowned the sexiest man alive, was dead at 38. Born in 1960, the son of President John F. Kennedy and Jackie Kennedy, John F. Kennedy Jr. spent his early years living in the White House with his older sister Caroline.
President Kennedy died.
After his father was assassinated in 1963, the family moved to New York City, where John attended private school, then headed to Brown University and NYU Law School, but he did not follow in his father's footsteps.
Ladies and gentlemen, meet George.
In 1995, he decided to start his own magazine.
You know, I've been lucky enough to have a lot of opportunities and feel very fortunate that there is this energy associated with it.
So many people who remembered the Kennedy presidency always assumed that someday he would go into politics.
I welcome this kind of examination.
I am paying for this microphone.
What difference does it make?
I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore. I'm just a patsy.
Not a Pax Americana, enforced on the world by American weapons of war.
Wherever there's a cop beating up a guy, I'll be there.
We didn't land on Plymouth Rock. The rock was landed on us.
The United States is owned by foreign corporations. Do you really care? And if anybody cares, they're considered crazy.
I have sinned against you, my Lord.
Man, all the humanity and all the...
Controllers here looking very carefully at the situation. Obviously a major malfunction.
An unspeakable tragedy. Dead on arrival.
And I will go to my grave being at peace about it.
Our long national nightmare is over.
Don't give up. Don't ever give up.
This is the Midnight Rider News Show with S.T. Patrick.
Hi, this is Mark Feldstein, the Eaton Chair of Broadcast Journalism at the University of Maryland. You're listening to the Midnight Rider News Show with S.T. Patrick.
Hello, America and the world. Welcome to the Midnight Rider News Show. I'm S.T. Patrick, your friendly neighborhood host, traipsing and traversing through the trials and travails that have so tempestuously and untruthfully been blasted into your eyes, ears, and minds by the state-sponsored talking heads, the court historians, and the textbook conglomerates that control information today. Tonight, we have episode 093, Donald Jeffries on the death of JFK Jr. Now, tonight's guest is researcher, author, and a strong Facebook follow, Mr. Donald Jeffries. He'll join us next in the midnight hour, but first, a little cleaning of the castle. Now, if you're listening to us right now on a podcatcher app such as, say, iTunes or the iPhone podcast app or Stitcher Radio, it does help us get seen if you can give the show a nice rating and a good review. And please, be nice. But it does help us quite a bit, so if you can do that, please do so. Now, if you're attending the JFK Assassination Conference in Dallas in a few weeks, you'll see the debut of the new Midnight Rider News t-shirts and the Oswald is Innocent t-shirts. That is, of course, if the company making the Oswald shirts for us gets them here on time. Fingers crossed, prayers said. Now, both shirts are really sharp, so you'll want to check those out if you're going to be there. And if you'd still like information on that conference, by the way, if you still want to go, you can go to jfkdallasconference.com. Once again, that's jfkdallasconference.com because you can still register there. Now, if you'll be there, please come up and say hello. And that's yes, even if you don't want to buy a t-shirt. I still want to say hello to you because I look forward to meeting everyone. But if you can't attend this year, but you do still want a t-shirt, you'll be able to see them as soon as we return home from the conference. So, this is the last episode of October. Now, next month is our second annual JFK month, and we're obviously very excited about that. Last year went splendidly. So we have some new guests this year, and we have some new ideas planned, but we also have some returning favorites, so it's going to be a lot of fun. And with that said, we'll be right back with Donald Jeffries.
Hi, my name is Steve Ubaney. I'm the author of an incredible book series, I Debunk American History. You'd be amazed to discover that some of the most famous deaths in American history were actually murders. Go to ForbiddenHistoryBooks.com. That's ForbiddenHistoryBooks.com and buy one of my books. You won't believe how you've been lied to. I always say the truth might hurt, but it should never be hidden. And I write to ensure that it never will be. ForbiddenHistoryBooks.com. I'll see you there.
Well, he's been on the program at least 4 times. Now, I know we've done episodes on his 2 books, Hidden History and Survival of the Richest, but we've also done an episode on Huey Long and one on Chappaquiddick. And I'm telling you, and I don't just say this because Donald's now a friend, a colleague at American Free Press, and a writer at Deep Truth Journal. If you haven't heard all 4 of those episodes, you are missing something. He always comes prepared, and he explains the problems and the intricacies of these stories with much ability. So truly, after you listen to this episode, go to our free archives at midnightwriternews.com and listen to those 4. So, all accolades out of the way, here he is, my friend Donald Jeffries. How are you this evening, Donald?
How you doing, Steve? Nice to be back.
I am well, and it's great to have you back on. You're always so kind to the show, and it's truly a pleasure to have you back. Now, this story, Donald, the death of John F. Kennedy Jr., it's chapter 7 of your wonderful book, Hidden History, which everyone should have. But let's set the stage, okay? So, who was in that plane the night of July 16th, 1999, and where were they going? And then the first controversial question of the evening, the first of many, was JFK Jr. a good pilot?
Well, July 16th, 1999, almost exactly 30 days to the day after the Chappaquiddick that embroiled Ted Kennedy. In fact, their bodies were found on the actual anniversary date of July 20th. But John F. Kennedy Jr., only son of President John F. Kennedy, handsome, charismatic figure who I think could have been elected to any office he wanted to if he had chosen to run, took off from Caldwell, New Jersey at 8:38 p.m. on July 16, 1999 with his wife Carolyn and his sister-in-law, Carolyn's sister, Lauren Bissett. They were headed for Martha's Vineyard, where they're going to be attending the wedding of Robert F. Kennedy's youngest child, Rory Kennedy, at Hyannisport. They took off in JFK Jr.'s Piper Saratoga plane. And again, this is there's beyond that, of course, the controversy begins. But we know that the story is that eventually that their plane went into a sudden spiral of a nosedive at 9:39 p.m. And 9:39 p.m. actually becomes very important later on. We'll discuss that in depth. But the official story is that basically almost exactly an hour and 1 minute after they took off, they went into a death spiral into the sea. And for some reason, it took them 4 days to find the bodies, and it took them 15 hours to begin the search. We'll go into that a little bit more as well. But JFK Jr. Was portrayed, and so many things about this case were portrayed inaccurately by the media, and we'll talk about all that too. But he was an experienced pilot. His own flight instructor said that, and we'll talk about what he said later too as well. But he was portrayed as an inexperienced, reckless pilot. Not true. He was experienced. This was a flight that he could easily have made, and the weather was not bad, and we'll talk about that as well, despite the claims of the media. So virtually nothing about this case that you may have heard, to the people who have not read my book, because before myself, there were only a handful of people on the internet. You had John Quinn from Newshawk, who did some great early work on the case. John DiNardo did some great work on the internet. John Hankey, who later put out a nice documentary people can still find online, The Death of JFK Jr., although I don't agree with him where he kind of tries to finger George W. Bush Jr. as the actual killer, but it's very interesting documentary and entertaining as well, and it points out a lot of the things I pointed out. And Wayne Madsen as well did some great work early on as well, and Anthony Hilder. Other than that, outside of that, almost no one in the mainstream media, much as we see in the other cases, the JFK assassination, 9/11, pick your event. No journalist was investigating this, so it's left for people like me until my book was published in 2014. No, you couldn't find all this stuff in one place, and I hope readers will check it out, because I did the most in-depth investigation anyone has done up to this point, and I think I proved conclusively that the official story was wrong. It was not an accident when John F. Kennedy Jr., his sister and his sister-in-law and his wife died that night.
There seems to be some disagreement over just how many passengers were in the plane.
Right. There was a lot of speculation that there was a flight instructor on board, because he was in the habit of flying with this flight instructor. And I believe he had told his co-editor at George Magazine in their last lunch together that he was going to have a flight instructor on board. And there was some speculation that this was tied to the fact that one of the seats, when they found the wreckage of the plane, they did not find one of the seats in the Saratoga plane. It was missing. So somehow that became wrapped up in, well, okay, the flight instructor is missing, the seat's missing, whatever. But again, it's because this crime wasn't investigated. We can only speculate on that. But also the fact that they did appear to wait a while at the Essex County Airport in New Jersey when they were taking off. Witnesses reported that they kind of hung around outside for a while and appeared to be waiting for someone. And speculation there again is that they were waiting for the flight instructor to show up. So again, we don't know, but there's certainly a lot of smoke there. Where if you had an investigative journalist that wanted to actually do some work, they could have tried to dig in and try to figure out what was going on there.
Well, right, but asking for good investigative journalism at this point in our history, at least, seems to be a pretty hollow call. So, the moment that they didn't arrive in either destination as scheduled, everyone you would think would have been concerned and the authorities would have been contacted. And also, as some may know, planes have a black box where communications are recorded. And then there's an ELT, an emergency location transmitter, so that if a plane goes down, it can quickly be located. Why didn't all of this happen?
Good questions. Well, it took, for unknown reasons, it took about 15 hours to begin the search after the authorities were first notified that the plane was overdue. The friends of Lauren Bissett especially, they were waiting for the Kennedys to arrive at Martha's Vineyard Airport. Once there at 10 p.m., it was overdue. They went and they talked to an employee named Adam Budd, and we'll talk more about him later. I guess he was just the guy they picked. Adam contacted the FAA in Bridgeport, Connecticut. Didn't get anywhere with them. Senator Ted Kennedy himself was informed, and he phoned the FAA himself at around 11 p.m. Still got no response. It was later, finally by 7 a.m., Ted Kennedy called, of all people, Bill Clinton's chief of staff, John Podesta, who lots of people know in relation to more recent events. He thought even though the search was immediately ordered after that, once he talked to Podesta by President Clinton himself, the Coast Guard still didn't arrive on the scene until 1 p.m., so making it about 15 hours since when they were first notified at 10 p.m. the night before till when they finally started searching. So very curious. And as you mentioned, unlike most private planes, the Piper Saratoga did have a black box. But in this case, one of those curious calling cards, the battery had been removed. So there was no battery there, so conveniently no conversations would have been recorded. All planes, as you noted, have an emergency location transmitter, an ELT. So this should have theoretically have sent out a signal immediately upon crashing. Now, JFK Jr. also failed to file a flight plan, which was something he characteristically did, and his flight log was mysteriously missing as well. Now, the original UPI report that we'll talk about in relation to 9:39 p.m. phone call also talked about that in reference to the ELT, that emergency location transmitter. They noted that there was a ELT that was thought to belong to JFK Jr.'s plane was heard by the Long Island Coast Guard at 3:40 a.m. But it's a quote from the article. It said, but as the search went on, authorities seemed to discount the relevance of this beacon signal. Now, why they would do that, I don't know, but there's no evidence they ever actually went and searched in that location. So that seemed to be a pretty good lead for them to go on. Strangely enough, they didn't. So lots and lots to go there. If we want to talk about the 9:39 p.m. phone call, I believe that's the most important part of this case. And the UPI report I referenced. Now, it originated with the UPI, but ABC News, other mainstream media, including the local television stations, we'll talk about that. I have tape I viewed of that, and I wrote about that in the book, hours and hours of it. They all were reporting in detail a 9:39 p.m. phone call from JFK Jr. to Martha's Vineyard Airport, during which he reported nothing was amiss. He seemed calm, and related how he was going to drop off his sister-in-law Lauren, and then fly on to Hyannisport for the wedding with his wife. So these were, specific details that the reports were quoting. So it's hard to imagine that somehow this phone call didn't take place, because the authorities were definitely reporting specific details. Now, after that 9th, that was reported. Now, as I talked about, I was sent hours of original news coverage by a researcher in Dallas named Scott Myers, a JFK researcher. He was kind enough he taped it live. And it's important to tape this stuff live, because later researchers would try to obtain footage from the local television stations, and they were really, really edited, and all the important stuff was taken out. But if you watch the tape that I have, you'll see, over and over again, there are references to this 9:39 p.m. phone call. Clearly, they thought it was important because it was, if nothing else, it was important in the fact that was the last contact from JFK Jr. Now, this is WCVB TV in Boston. Again, they talked about this constantly, and the station even conducted an interview with a Coast Guard spokesman, Todd Bergen. Now, during that, you can watch the interview, and he quotes from the UPI report. He says the same kind of stuff. He was basically waiting landing instructions. He was, I think, 13 miles from the airport at that time, 10 miles off the coast. I emailed a reporter whose name was Susan Warnick about, I think, 3 different times, trying to find, just say, hey, don't you think this, aren't you curious about, why the Coast Guard would send a spokesman to discuss in detail a phone call, which later we were told by the government didn't happen when the Pentagon took over the case? And they basically just said, no, there was no 39 p.m. phone call. She never replied. So, and again, in later, the edited coverage later by the researchers, all the references to this 9:39 p.m. phone call have been scrubbed. So if you get the people that got them later, they didn't get them live, like I got them courtesy of Scott Myers, we're out of luck because they would have known that any, and I emailed lots of several people that were connected to this case, and one of the guys was an anchor that was anchoring this coverage, Chet Curtis, and during the coverage, I was impressed with how much he was actually questioning the story he seemed to be, because he kept basically inferring that the weather wasn't that bad, and I got the sense that he didn't necessarily believe what the authorities seemed to be saying. But when I emailed him, he said he had no problems with the official story, said he didn't remember anything about the 9:39 p.m. phone call. And I could show people the tapes, and he's reporting it over and over again. How he would not remember that is beyond me. And he didn't remember the interview they did with the Coast Guard. He didn't do the interview, but he was on air, I believe, at the time when his co-anchor or the reporter there did the interview. So that's the kind of thing that's very distressing when you actually contact these media people yourself, and they tell you something that outlandish that you don't remember reporting something that you reported over and over again. Perhaps maybe the most important political event I'm guessing that he may have been, that actually took place in their area, that he may have reported on in his career. But that's what we're left with. They don't have any media doing any investigative reporting. There was also edited out were all the reports from Martha's Vineyard Gazette reporter. Now it's important to recall here that there was a local reporter for a very small newspaper called the Martha's Vineyard Gazette who reported early on, and again, they made reference to it in UPI and all those early reports, that a local reporter for the Vineyard Gazette had seen a midair explosion in that place, in that area, at about that time. Clearly should have, set off red flags. Hey, that must have been JFK Jr.'s plane. Nobody still has identified that reporter. I tried to track him down later. The Vineyard Gazette now denies that they don't even remember anything about the report. I had exchanged emails, and I quote them in the book, with their editor. And earlier, John DiNardo, right after it happened, he attempted to talk to the reporter. He called the station, but he was told they told him the story was bogus. It was basically fireworks or some nonsense like that. And they said the reporter wasn't there anymore and had gone back to school. Now, later, I talked to Steve Zabracka, who was, or communicated with Steve Zabracka, who was a very rare reporter who was apparently interested in what actually happened. He was the first reporter on the scene there, and he described that reporter, the Vineyard Gazette reporter, because he talked to him in detail. I said, this guy was real, very real, and he'd swear on it in court of law. And he described him as older, with salt and pepper hair, stocky older man. So clearly nobody that would have been going back to school. So that's where we're standing with that. And all references to that, again, that reporter, both the 9:39 p.m. phone call and all references to that Vineyard Gazette reporter have been edited out of that coverage, a local coverage, when researchers attempted to get it years later. There was, we also had, not only those, you had that, again, just to keep on the witnesses for a second, you not only had the elusive Vineyard Gazette reporter who no one has ever been able to find, and until I talked to Steve Zabracka, we didn't even know what the gender was. But he was an older guy, and again, Steve Zabracka said he'd swear on it. So if you had an investigation, he'd swear in court of law, and he gave a basic description of him. He didn't know his name. He didn't get his name. But there was also a lawyer, Victor Probanik, who was in the area, and he heard an explosion at the same time in that area. The same time, right around the time JFK Jr.'s plane was said to have gone down. He talked to people like Anthony Hilder, who was an internet researcher, but again, the story didn't go any farther than that. I actually attempted to email him during the course of writing Hidden History, but he didn't respond to that. I mean, unfortunately, a lot of these people they're scared, or they don't want to, give any further information. They realize what's going on. I guess if you realize you see something and no one in the mainstream media is interested, and then you hear them reporting something completely different, I guess you get the message loud and clear. So I'm assuming maybe that's what happened. But once the Pentagon took control of this case, again, the search took a long time. Strangely, started in the wrong place. I mean, they should have logically started searching for the plane off the coast of the Martha's Vineyard Airport, which is where you would think there he was approaching, but instead they started in an entirely different area, far from that scene. So apparently, for whatever reason, but it wasted time, however you look at it. And once the Pentagon took over, it was just shocking to see their first press conference where they just, the 9:39 p.m. No, we never heard from him. Once he took off, he was never heard from again. And then you started to get this cover story started to go into place. And for people that have studied the JFK assassination, 9/11, any of these events, sometimes it takes a while for that official narrative to get set in stone. But then you see the cover story, and it usually contradicts all kinds of early information that were reported even in the mainstream media. And in this case, it certainly did. And the 9:39 p.m. phone call was just flushed down the memory hole, never to be heard from again. And that's when we started hearing JFK Jr. was reckless. He was reckless. He shouldn't have flown. It was so hazy out. And I believe it was NBC News' medical correspondents for some reason. Strange coincidence, supposedly flew the exact same flight JFK Jr. did 15 minutes after he did or something. And he came on air and breathlessly talked about, I couldn't see anything, and he should have never gone out. It was so reckless. It's like, what? It's a very, very convenient flight pattern for him. But you could go online. I don't know if you still could, but at the time I was writing the book, you still could go online and find people had saved online radar screens from that night, and they showed how the weather was not bad at all, and not bad at all. And even though, and again, people have to also realize if Senator Kennedy himself was reporting the Senator Ted Kennedy had reported the plane missing himself to the FAA at 11 p.m., the Pentagon also said that they were not notified. The authorities weren't notified during that press conference until 2 a.m. But again, just an obvious lie. The friends of Lauren Bissett first contacted that airport employee at 10 p.m. Ted Kennedy got involved at 11 p.m. So again, why is the government lying and saying nobody informed us until 2 a.m.? And why did the search not start to 1 p.m. the next day?
Well, it's hard for me to even fathom why the Pentagon has the case at this time. It certainly seems beyond their jurisdiction.
Yeah, they had no reason at all to be there. JFK Jr. was never in the military, in any branch of the military, and there was no military craft involved. It was a private flight on JFK Jr.'s private airplane, who was a private citizen, flying with other private citizens. So, yeah, that made no sense at all. But again, people don't question this. I mean, I guess, some of us in the general public do, but no investigative journalists. Those are the kind of questions, if we had real reporters, especially when the Pentagon took over, they should have grilled them mercilessly about that. They should have held up the UPI report. Well, what is this 9:39 p.m. phone call about? Who is this Todd Bergen guy from the Coast Guard? Why did he give this? They should have talked about it. And when they said they weren't notified until 2 a.m., they should have known that Ted Kennedy had called them at 11 p.m. And they says, what do you mean, Ted Kennedy? And Ted Kennedy, if he had any integrity left, and unfortunately, I think by that time he was completely either scared or bought out. He should have gotten involved and said, what are you lying about that for? I called you guys at 11 p.m. myself. What are you talking about? Why are you getting on there and saying that you weren't notified till 2? I mean, it may seem like a small thing, but most of us that are study these things don't have any trust in any of these government officials because of things like that. Why would you lie about something like that? Even if on the surface maybe, okay, it's not that strong a detail, but why would you lie about it? It makes this, so if you're lying about that, you could be lying about anything.
Well, right, and there was a specialist, an FAA flight specialist named Edward Meyer, who also presented a report. So how did Meyer's report correspond with the NTSB report?
Well, again, it's as he said, the NTSB report actually seemed to be pretty truthful, because he said the NTSB report contradicted this is in an email to me. Originally, early on, he just took the very unusual step of releasing a public statement refuting everything the media had been reporting. Readers got to read what he wrote. it was incredible. He blasted what we would call today fake news. So this is not true. Kennedy, was on the, basically instrument trained. I don't think he had been actually passed his last test, but he was definitely able to fly this route. The weather was not bad. He was not reckless. So in an email to me, he was still just as angry years later. And he said, I quote, "The NTSB report contradicted everything," all caps, everything that was said by the media. So he's basically saying the guy that wrote the flight report on the weather is saying that the media lied about everything related to this case. So for those that doubt it, this is the guy that, is an insider that wrote the report, and he said he could tell he's still mad about it. But again, I'm talking about it, but, are we seeing news reports anywhere about it? Because the media will not investigate these things. Much as they didn't question it at the time, they're not questioning it now. But, and one of the other reporters that actually did a good job is Wayne Madsen. I'm sure you know about him. He's kind of an alternative guy, and he's but he has a little bit. He has like one foot in the mainstream. I think he used to work for some mainstream newspapers a long time ago, but he was set. He had, through a mediary, I believe at the Village Voice magazine, he had contacted JFK Jr.'s. Not personally. He said he never communicated with him personally, but through his contact at the Village Voice, they'd set up a meeting with JFK Jr., which would have taken place shortly, unfortunately after he died. And it was basically about being hired as one of a new team of reporters for George Magazine. And Wayne Madsen's main role was going to be investigating the assassination of John F. Kennedy, his father. Which is, again, was revolutionary, because, we know the Kennedy family has, except for John F. Kennedy Jr. apparently, and now RFK Jr. is basically coming out too. But other than that, until this time, what I had myself had questioned the Kennedy family over and over again. Why are you keeping silent on this? When we look at Martin Luther King's family, for instance, that was so open about questioning the official story and trying to get James Earl Ray a new trial. But apparently behind the scenes, and I found out again while studying this through, as I communicated with a member of JFK Jr.'s adult inner circle who strongly requested to remain anonymous, and also with Megazzoni, who was John F. Kennedy Jr.'s high school girlfriend.
You bring up Wayne Madsen, and he's an interesting guy. Interesting and apparently elusive as well. I've actually been efforting him for almost a year and a half now, and he just doesn't seem to be responding to my email attempts, or maybe I'm just not using the correct email address. That's possible too. But he is one of those guys like yourself and like Joe Green and like the late, great John Judge and Mae Brussel, who really has a wide range of knowledge about a wide range of topics.
Yes. Yeah, he was. Well, he doesn't always answer my emails either. But I know people that know him better than I do and have met him personally. I just missed meeting him personally last year in D.C. with John Barber and all those people that were here to show in John Barber's great film about the media and the JFK assassination. But I can try checking in that for you. But but just think of that. Here he is. He was, and I certainly trust him. He's done good work. He was going to be basically starting a job at George Magazine. So apparently George Magazine, much like JFK Jr. himself, was about to embark down some new and much more important, significant roads here. Because although JFK Jr. had shown signs already, he had questioned the official version of the Rabin assassination in Israel, and he had interviewed Oliver Stone. Mr. Conspiracy. So, to do that. And I mentioned also one of the very curious things I found was he showed up at a White House Correspondents' Dinner, I think the year before his death, with Larry Flynt, who was not only controversial for being the publisher of Hustler magazine, but was very involved in the JFK assassination controversy and had famously issued a $1 million reward for the true murderers of John F. Kennedy. So his son was showing up with him and going to a White House Correspondents' Dinner with the son of John F. Kennedy.
We're talking to Donald Jeffries, the author of Hidden History and Survival of the Richest. Now, Donald, when we do these stories, I usually ask you about the autopsies. That's a given. And almost without fail, there are shenanigans that surround the handling of the deceased. But in this case, there are not only questions about expedience, but there are also questions that have some religious curiosities.
Yeah, well, I mean, the most incredible, it was so strange that even newspaper outlets like the Boston Globe questioned. I believe they said JFK Jr. autopsy rushed or something like that, but they questioned it. And they even had a quote in there from a medical examiner or something that talked about, with the amount of time they did all 3 autopsies in just an incredibly short period of time. And he basically said, and he was a kind of a renowned figure in the field, and he basically said, that amount of time is not enough time to do thorough autopsies, and this would indicate that this was really a rush, these were rush jobs. And what I found most interesting, of course, was that they all were cremated. And I cannot find any record of any other Kennedy being cremated. As a Catholic myself, I think times have changed. Catholics sometimes, I think it's still very seldom though, but they do get cremated now. But for a long time, the Catholic Church did not allow that. Or, you're to be buried as a Catholic, you could not be cremated. But John F. Kennedy Jr. was, and I found that a little strange. And as always, the media, comes out and makes us, and not only that, I believe the Boston Globe itself, again, I think it was the Boston Globe, questioned it too. They actually had an article about, because they recognized it was kind of odd. And I think in conjunction with the rushed autopsy and how things were just it happened so quickly, I think that they kind of put that all together. And, for an establishment newspaper, I guess it was about as good as you get. I mean, it wasn't really investigative reporting, but they did question it a bit. So, and I have some quotes from the articles in the book, and I guess that's really, unfortunately, about the most we can expect from our kept media. But it was very strange. And then you had, I believe it was Eben Thomas, who was the son of socialist Norman Thomas. He used to run for president all the time back in the day. But Eben Thomas had written the establishment biography of Robert F. Kennedy Sr., and he was there on the spot to issue it, saying that, it's understandable that they were cremated because they didn't want to have a shrine to JFK Jr. that might become fodder for ghouls who would desecrate his grave. And as I point out in the book, I mean, that's ridiculous. John F. Kennedy, the president, his brother Robert F. Kennedy, no one, to my knowledge, has ever desecrated their graves. There's never been any ghouls there. So why would anybody even think that? But that's what the media, unfortunately, in our country, for these kinds of cases, instead of questioning and talking about the 9:39 p.m. phone call or the FAA, Edward Meyer's report and his questioning in the media, things that should be questioned about this, why it took so long to begin the search, why it began in a place that wasn't a logical place to begin with, on the ELT not going off, the black box not having the battery in it, over and over, these things that are everywhere, question marks that should cry out for investigation. Instead, we have the Eben Thomases of the world trying to make excuses. And again, for those who are wondering, why would they be cremated? Well, because they obviously didn't want the ghouls. It's like, come on. It's this case is no different than any of the others. We unfortunately are discussing this on your show. People like me are writing about it because professional journalists just won't investigate these things.
Well, one of those talking heads is MSNBC's Chris Matthews, the host of Hardball, which is a program that's woefully misnamed until he starts asking questions about why we're in a permanent war state. It's not hardball. But I digress. But Matthews was supposedly a great admirer of JFK, and he's written some perplexing stuff on Kennedy over the years, and his analysis of John Jr.'s future career was just confusing.
Oh, and it contradicted a report on his own show. I believe it was like the week or maybe 2 weeks before that, he had a report on Hardball about Hillary Clinton trying to stop any potential John F. Kennedy Jr. run for the New York Senate seat. So, and then after he's dead, he's saying, well, no, he was not about to enter politics. He was satisfied. It's like, what, but again, there's nobody there. And fortunately, he's a journalist himself, allegedly, but there's nobody other than, someone like me writing a book about it that's questioning it. But certainly someone should have, what are you talking about? You just had a report on your own show contradicting that. But very conveniently, and Chris Matthews has a history of that. As you know, on the JFK assassination itself, he's like all of these so-called liberal mainstream journalists. He just is a diehard Warren Report lover. He smears anybody that says otherwise. And, one of his more absurd books was he wrote a book, where he tried to claim, I think Kennedy and Nixon were really great buddies or something. It's like, I don't know where that came from. I don't think the record shows that at all, but, that's unfortunately, that's the kind of, he has a television show. He has a big public platform, and that's the problem, is that people like that are out there just spewing disinformation, and the people that are trying to tell the truth are left with smaller public platforms. So we have to hope that more and more people listen to shows like yours so that we can get the truth out there.
And for a little view into what could have been, here's John F. Kennedy Jr. introducing his Uncle Ted at the 1988 Democratic National Convention.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
His sister, Caroline, is watching at home in New York, where she's celebrating her husband's birthday and tending to their new baby daughter.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Over a quarter century ago, my father stood before you to accept the nomination for the presidency of the United States. So many of you came into public service because of him. In a very real sense, because of you, he is with us still. And for that, I'm grateful to all of you. I owe a special debt to the man his nephews and nieces call Teddy. Not just because of what he means to me personally, but because of the causes he has carried on. He has shown that an unwavering commitment to the poor, to the elderly, to those without hope, regardless of fashion or convention, is the greatest reward of public service. Thank you. I'm not a political leader, but I can speak for those of my age who have been inspired by Teddy to give their energy and their ideas to their community and not just to themselves. Thank you. Thank you. In that ongoing effort, young people, and not only the young, but all like-minded citizens, all of you, will be guided by the honorable and unyielding example of the senior senator from Massachusetts. Thank you. He has shown that our hope is not lost idealism, but a realistic possibility. America is better because of the leadership of Edward Kennedy. Thank you. continue to guide us for many years to come. Ladies and gentlemen, my uncle, Ted Kennedy.
Teddy Kennedy is very fond of John Kennedy, but in that family, of course, there's a lot of good-natured kidding, and you can already hear the cousins critiquing young John's introduction tonight. They'll be teasing him about that, but no doubt they're very proud because it was a sterling performance. He is interested in the theater and dramatic arts, and I think that he demonstrated that tonight he can hold his own as a member of the Kennedy family when it comes to a public appearance. Now his uncle,
thank you,
Senator
John,
Kennedy.
for that.
He would obviously hope that one time he would be here accepting the Democratic presidential nomination of his party, but that was not to be.
Thank you, Tom. I am here with John F. Kennedy Jr. doing his first interview. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
Tell me, that was your first time speaking before such a large audience, wasn't it?
It was. I've done an occasional campaign appearance for Teddy, but this was certainly the largest that I've ever seen.
And how did it feel?
Felt pretty good, surprisingly.
Were you nervous at all?
Yeah, I was very nervous. But it happened, you know. It's over. I knew it would be over soon, so that's all I thought about, really.
Tell me why you decided to do it.
Because Teddy asked. That's enough.
Now, you're, what year in law school are you at NYU?
I'm finishing my last year, beginning in September.
Do you think you might be interested in going into politics?
Well, I'm completely busy and consumed by what I'm doing now, and, you know, obviously find public issues interesting, and I can't help but find a convention like this interesting. But I'm just, you know, I'll see what happens, and I'm happy doing what I'm doing.
One of your cousins, I think, Patrick, is a delegate from Rhode Island.
Yeah.
Would you consider doing that maybe 4 years from now, becoming a delegate?
Gosh, I really can't think what I'm doing next year, what I'm doing in 4 years. I really don't know, but I'll just have to see.
All right. And congratulations, your sister just had a baby?
Just had a baby. I'm an uncle and getting used to it. So.
Thank you so much. John F. Kennedy Jr., thank you for being with us. Tom?
Thank you very much, Connie, and John F. Kennedy.
It's easy, I guess, to look back and say, what if? And the history of this family sure allows us to do that. But there's one thing that we do know, one thing we can know. And that's that the mainstream media, even in a story's infancy, reflexively denies conspiracy as if conspiracies never happen. And they may not know what the answer is, but they sure want you to know and understand that what happened is not nefarious and that no one associated with the U.S. government could have possibly been involved. And Donald, do you have any idea why this is the reflexive stance?
No, it's just a conspiracy theorist. Is there a conspiracy theorist or conspiracy theory has just become like a catch-all term that describes questioning of anything. I mean, you know, it's not a conspiracy theory to ask what happened to all the reports about that 9:39 p.m. phone call. It's not a conspiracy theory to say, can we talk to Todd Bergen, the Post Office spokesman? I mean, I tried to track him down. I did find his phone. I'm pretty sure it was him. I left a message for him. He didn't answer. Although someone on the internet had claimed they'd contacted the Boston Coast Guard, I think, before that, and they said they had never heard of a Todd Bergen in the Coast Guard. So I don't know if that's true or not, but he never replied, much as I talked to the mother of Adam Budd, who was the airport employee who, as his mother told me, yeah, he was in the center of everything that night. He just happened to be there when the friends of the Bassettes were distraught about the plane, and he was the one who made the original call to the FAA. His mother seemed about, but like a lot of these witnesses that you talk to, you either sense the fear or you sense that they're hesitant. And, and if none of these things are conspiracies and nothing's going on, why would anybody be hesitant about talking about something like that? If it's just an accident, why not talk about it? And I could tell that she wanted to, and she was on the verge of saying something more, but kind of backed off. And she took my number and said, I'll see if he's interested. And he never called me. So,
for anyone out there who's read a few RFK biographies, you may recognize the name C. David Heyman. Now, he wrote RFK, a candid biography of Robert F. Kennedy, and in it he alleged a bit of an affair between Bobby and Jackie Kennedy. Yeah. So he's not a great fan nor a keen observer of the Kennedy men, yet somehow he maneuvered his way into this story.
Right. And he was the main purveyor of, he wanted to, I believe the dramatics title was something, he wanted to go it alone or something. Why he had to JFK Jr. had to prove that he could do it without a flight instructor. And C. David Heyman, I believe Jim DiEugenio was the one who really has talked about, I think he had ties to the Mossad at one point. And, he was this is a guy who wrote a book. Now, he's claiming, of course, that that JFK wanted to go alone. This came from JFK Jr. himself, because he's claiming he, actually talked to him and acted like he was, friend of his. And, I believe, I can't think of the gossip reporters now. Her name's not on the tip of my tongue now, but she actually went and checked with JFK Jr.'s appointment secretary. They had never heard of C. David Heyman. Nobody knew who he was in JFK Jr.'s circle. So I think he just completely made it up. And another great quote from somebody who worked with JFK Jr. said, look at this. Why would this guy said, I can't believe the only thing I believe that somebody, that he would want to do to a reporter that C. David Heyman had also speculated in his lurid book about the Kennedys that, Robert F. Kennedy was sleeping with Jackie Kennedy. After this, so he said, I can't believe that all he would want to do is the only thing he would want to do is punch out somebody that wrote, that his uncle screwed his mother. That's the way I would think it would be too. I don't think he would be buddy with this guy, but unfortunately the C. David Heymans of the world are able to, inject themselves in these stories because there are no real journalists, and they sell that sensationalist aspect. Bobby and Jackie slept together. So our media will go for that. They'll go for those kind of things that are, almost always untrue, much as the Kennedy, the JFK sex stuff with Marilyn Monroe or whatever. All that will get the same, will get attention that the so-called conspiracy theories about his death won't. The same reporters that are willing to peddle that won't listen to anything you have to say about the magic bullet or any of the other real evidence in the assassination or any of these cases. So
You've told us quite a bit tonight about investigating the story on your own. This was definitely not Library Research 101. And you discussed talking to Chet Curtis, the mother of Adam Budd, Magazzoni, who we'll discuss more in a minute. And then there was Steve Sabracchia.
Yeah, Steve Sabracchia. He was, it really shocked me. He was the first guy I emailed about this. And, I was astounded because I basically couched my email, in terms of I was maybe a student doing a paper about the case or something. I made certain that I didn't say anything about conspiracy in it, but he must have seen through it because he just blurted out, in his email that, hey, I've always thought that there was something, he called it wrong about the crash. And, he talked about how JFK Jr. was a private citizen and, no government connections, and yet all the government the officials that were there on the site and so quickly. And he was also important because he's the one that spoke to the Vineyard Gazette reporter that they'd seen the explosion in the sky and should have been a really important witness, but fortunately we still don't know his name, and he didn't get his name. But he did assure me he was a real person. He was very sure about what he saw. And then again, later, as I said, he offered to swear in court that the name was real and gave a great description of him. And, he's a very bold guy. And I haven't emailed him for a while. I probably should email him and see if he ever read the book, but he was wishing me luck with it, and he seemed to really, he said, I'm not saying buying into conspiracy theories, but he believed that, there were questions there, and he thought that they should be asked. And if there were more reporters like him, and it gave me hope that there obviously maybe are, and I think that I always thought there were some, but who knows how many, but there are reporters out there like Steve Sabracchia who have courage, but unfortunately they don't have maybe enough power to really do much about it.
Well, you would think that law enforcement would find it interesting to watch the mood or maybe the actions of JFK Jr. and the Bassett sisters at the airport. So, therefore, the security video at Essex County Airport should be of at least nominal value, and we should all be able to view them.
Should be able to, but if those tapes, I'm assuming, I haven't been able to find out for sure that they had security tapes at that time, but if they did, no researcher's ever seen them. But I don't know who would have asked for them outside of one of these, because again, no reporters were investigating it. So, maybe John Quinn, who was the first guy, really the early Newshawk reports online, those are the ones that got my attention back in 1999. Because the internet, for those who remember back then, I think the internet was more of a bit of a Wild West place in the late 90s. And I think there was a lot more information out there and it was easier to access. So back then, there were a lot of really good reports. I believe it was Sherman Skolnick. I don't know if I even mentioned him in the book, but he wrote like Whatever Happened to America's Golden Boy. And he based a lot on the NTSB report. But he talked about a lot of these things. Skolnick was another great reporter, kind of an outlandish guy. He's the one that started the Chicago Committee to clean up the courts. And he was in a wheelchair, and he would go into court all the time and fight them over various things. But he was a real reporter, and there's not many out there like that. But so almost all the information I had to rely on until I talked to some of these people myself or emailed them. All I had to go on were those early news, those internet reports, and of course watching that local news coverage, which was very illuminating because it showed that, hey, this 9:39 p.m. phone call was not a figment of some conspiracy theorist's imagination. This was something that was reported over and over again, was reported by UPI and ABC News and so forth. And the Coast Guard sent a guy out to do an interview about it to a television station. So I think, again, the average citizen, you don't have to be a Harvard graduate to recognize that the Coast Guard is not going to send a public relations officer out to do an interview with a television station about a phone call that didn't happen.
No, they wouldn't. It does seem as if they're trying to stay one step ahead of the story and explaining most of the discovery before or shortly after it was actually discovered. Now, I was going to ask you this earlier, but you did have some communication with Megazzoni, an ex-girlfriend of John's. So what were your impressions?
Ultimately, I don't know what really came of it. I can't, and I want to be kind here. I would just describe her as eccentric, maybe extremely eccentric, and that's a good thing because I have a lot of eccentric things about me. I usually admire that, but she was so. It's not I'm usually drawn to that, but in this case, it was hard to communicate because she didn't. I emailed her a few times, but she didn't like emailing because she thought, I think she described it as someone could hack into my email or so. I said, okay, I'm not sure what you're talking about. But, so we communicated through snail mail somewhat because she also wouldn't talk on the phone. I think she asked for my phone number, but then, she never wanted to talk on the phone. So I communicated and she sent me her privately published manuscript, which was interesting. And had lots of good pictures, everything about, and I believe, the main exposés in that, I believe she reported hearing, I believe that, I don't have the exact quote, but that Jackie, that thought LBJ was behind the assassination. And, she did talk about JFK Jr. having what she termed a quest to find out who killed his father. And, that was basically bolstered by, again, that anonymous person in his adult circle, who wasn't eccentric, but was very reluctant and very frightened, apparently, to talk, because, again, I had to keep that person anonymous, but that person did assure me that, yes, this is something that JFK Jr., he used to talk about the assassination all the time, and it was something he was keenly interested in. So that alone just really fascinated me because I thought, wow, okay, I had always assumed the Kennedys must really behind the scenes be thinking about this stuff and trying to do something about it. But we know even more so than Robert F. Kennedy, as you know, through David Talbot's book, Brothers and so forth, we we know now, and through Robert F. Kennedy's aides and so forth, that behind the scenes, although he was publicly expressing support for the Warren Report, behind the scenes he was doing his own investigating and would undoubtedly have reopened the case if he'd been elected president. And I think in John F. Kennedy Jr.'s case, I don't think there's any question, he was on the verge of, and I think that's why he was killed. He was on the verge of entering politics, and I think even more so than RFK, he had almost like a Shakespearean quest. This is like something at a Hamlet or something, where he wanted to avenge his father's death, and I think he would have left no stone unturned, and I think he was just about to do it, and unfortunately he was stopped.
How much evidence do we really have that he was going to run for office?
Well, yeah, we don't really have, other than there were murmurs at the time, and people forget, how, they say, well, he would have run. Well, he was very young. He was 39 when he died. That's really young. And, no, he was older than his father. His father went into politics at a really young age, but he went into at a younger age and ended up being the youngest man ever elected to the presidency because of that. But I think it was about the right time for him, and knowing what we know, that, because if you look on the surface of it, you think of JFK Jr. as a kind of a celebrity, the hottest man, People magazine, sexiest man alive, and that stuff, where, he appeared on, Murphy Brown. He appeared on Murphy Brown. Howard Stern interviewed him, things like that. So he was really a fun-loving, kind of laid-back guy, and he did have acting aspirations. Actually, that's originally what he wanted to do. Unlike his father, JFK, who wanted to be a journalist originally, JFK Jr. really wanted to be an actor, and I believe his mother really stifled those aspirations because she didn't really want him, I guess, being in the public eye like that. But eventually, I think he also had to bide his time. I think one reason he waited too is because his mother died in 1994, I believe it was. So it was, I think he had basically, promised her or something, maybe that's what people speculate, that he wouldn't, if he went into politics, he wouldn't during her lifetime or something. But, so I think that may be another reason why, but I think that the timing was right, and certainly we get these inferences. I mean, Chris Matthews himself, had a show about it where he was talking about Hillary Clinton concerned about John F. Kennedy Jr. running for New York. And there are rumors, I believe it was Time Magazine or Newsweek that was supposed to do a cover story. It was supposed to come out, I believe, that weekend that Monday after he died or whatever, about JFK Jr. entering politics. So will we ever know that for sure? I don't know. But I think that certainly provides a powerful motive for someone to kill him if they knew he was finally going to go start entering politics.
Donald, I know this is all just speculation at this point, but in your opinion, why did this happen and who was responsible?
Well, I think this was just another Kennedy assassination is the way I put it. I mean, I think it's pretty obvious what it was. Now, I don't think that John Hankey, I respect his work, but I don't think George W. Bush killed him or had him killed. Or I think these things happen at a much higher level than that. As much as I don't think LBJ had JFK killed. I think, again, these people might know, and certainly in LBJ's case, he had knowledge. George W. Bush might have known. I don't know. Hillary Clinton might have known. I don't think he was. Although I said, okay, I guess you could kind of loosely count him on the Clinton body count because it did happen during Clinton's administration, and he quite possibly would have gone up against Hillary Clinton in a New York Senate race. But I think it happens at a higher, especially when you're talking about a Kennedy, because we know how many Kennedys have died on natural deaths, and the establishment has so much invested in covering up their deaths, especially because you uncover one and there's so many others that fall apart. You go back to JFK's or even JFK's brother, Joseph Kennedy Jr., who's died in a mysterious plane crash, and who really would have been the first Kennedy, almost certainly would have been the first Irish Catholic president, rather than John F. Kennedy, because he was the natural politician in the family. So there's so many of these deaths, and John F. Kennedy Jr. and his death is tied to all those. And if he really, as we know now, I think we can pretty much know for certain that he did have a strong desire to expose the truth about his father's assassination. And unlike Carol and his sister and anybody else in the Kennedy family, until Robert F. Kennedy Jr. recently now has started basically saying these things as well, no other Kennedy family member had ever stepped forward and publicly expressed their doubts like the majority of the public has about these things. But I forgot one thing I wanted to mention about JFK Jr. is that I did, in the NTSB report is really important, but one other very strange thing is that the fuel selector valve in the plane was found in the off position according to the NTSB report. Now, I'm not an expert on that, but what we do know is those valves can't be turned off, accidentally, like somebody during the flight, maybe he just bumped against it or something. There has to be a decided, a decision to turn that off. And as I understand, the only reason that you would turn something like that is be like an emergency, like a fire on board. Like if the plane caught fire, you might do that. And the plane was also capable of gliding some 5 miles to a landing. So the question is, apparently there was no evidence, found of any kind of emergency situation like a fire or anything like that, a bomb, or because we're told basically it just went into a death spiral out of nowhere. That's what we're expected to believe. And again, the important thing here is that they claim that his plane suddenly plunged into the ocean at into the waters at 9:39 p.m., which is the exact time of that phone call. That's why it's so key. So if there was no reason for the valve to be off, and if there had been a problem, if there was no evidence of a problem, then why didn't JFK Jr., if there was whatever happened to where he couldn't fly it anymore, why didn't he just glide the plane, which apparently could go like 5 miles to a safe landing? So these are the questions I think that that aren't asked, and there's so many here that no one asked, and until I wrote about it in Hidden History, really I'd like to do a bigger book on it, but the problem is it's getting people to talk. Like there was a connection to Anthony Radziwill, who was JFK Jr.'s cousin, and he died, I think right after, very short, but he had cancer, but he was very young though. And his wife, Carol Radziwill, went on to, she is also apparently the one that originally contacted the FAA, I believe, supposedly, or one of the first ones, or maybe in the middle of the night or something. But she later became one of the housewives of New York City or something on TV. So my wife knows who she is because she watches those shows. But I was hoping to try, because I wanted to get clarification on that call to the FAA, what they said to her, but she never replied to me. And so that's, there's so many mysterious things. And one other thing, like you said about the security capes at the Essex County airport, what we do know, witnesses reported that JFK Jr. was engaged in a lengthy, or at least what looked to be an intense cell phone conversation at about 8:25 p.m. that right before he took off, because he took off at 8:38 supposedly. Now, looking at it, if he went on to die on board the plane, then that was almost certainly his last phone conversation. So if I'm conducting an investigation, now all they had, apparently they did look at his cell phone, and it had evidence of an outgoing call at 8:25. I would do everything I could to try to figure out who he was talking to, because that could be significant, but no one ever came forward. And, you would think, again, even on a sensationalist aspect, that someone would come forward and say, last guy to talk to JFK Jr. and to be, the National Enquirer, if nothing else. No one ever did. So those are the kind of things. And if we did have the security tapes, they might explain something, and they might, I think most importantly and most crucially, perhaps most significantly, they might show that flight instructor showing up, and maybe that's why they were waiting, and maybe you would see that fourth person on board, which in that case, if that happened, then that just shatters the entire official story, and someone has some explaining to do.
Hey, I have one more question for you tonight. Now we've never really discussed this at all, but I wanted to get your impressions on this pipe bomb packages story and this arrest of Cesar Sayoc. Now, I would say that I'm not surprised that he was a Floridian, as I say all the time. The craziest stories always seem to happen in Florida. But I've seen you comment on some social media about this story, and I wanted to give you an opportunity to give your thoughts here. So what do you think is really happening? What do you think is the story behind the story?
Well, I tend to, my new rule of thumb is if one, and these are, I call them events. They happen so quickly, and already the pipe bomb thing was replaced by the synagogue shooting. I mean, they're one after the other. And so you can't even really look into one very, very deeply until the next one comes. So I just looked at it, what little I saw of it on the surface. It just seems so like a very childish attempt to frame Trump. I mean, all these bombs that none of them exploded went to all these, basically all his greatest enemies, all members of the deep state. And what I found most fascinating is, as I understand it, the bombs went to Clinton and Obama both. And apparently, according to the Secret Service and the U.S. Postal Service, the USPS will not deliver a package to a figure like that who has Secret Service protection. The Secret Service delivers it for security reasons. Well, according to the official story, the Postal Service did deliver packages to them. So those are the questions I would be asking if I would be a reporter. If I was a reporter, I'd say, well, wait a minute, how you're saying the USPS delivered those? Why did they do that? Isn't that a violation of security? So I think that's the kind of thing I would be looking at. The fact none of the bombs went off and the van of the guy. I mean, you talk about overkill. I mean, I don't know how the guy could. How could the guy legally drive with? I mean, did he have any visibility with all this Trump stuff?
Oh gosh, I know. That was
laughable.
It was almost like a cartoon character, and not even a complex perpetrator. But this is what passes now. This is what we want. I keep saying this over and over and over. But we keep wanting our news so dumbed down that we now have this superhero good guy, and then we have this Boris and Natasha villain, and it reminds me of those comedies. It reminds me of one of those comedies where the witness is brought in to view the lineup, and you have four guys who all look completely normal and completely unlike the real suspect. And then you have the one guy, and then you have this one guy that looks exactly like a, uber exaggerated version of some criminal stereotype. And yet, when it comes across our television screens, we believe it. Why? Because it's on the news, and Donald, all the stations are reporting it. Now, all the stations wouldn't be lying, would they? And it's what I want to believe, so it must be true. It's
that's true. And it just again, the reporters don't ask the questions, and in this case, so much of this stuff is so driven by just an incredible bias. And again, Trump is in the center of everything. He's a lightning rod here, and there's such an attempt here to try to demonize him. And again, it's not supporting Trump, but it's so obvious to me that this is, oh my God, and I think if I read it correctly, somebody was even talking online about how, I guess one of the envelopes was misspelled or something, and they were saying, see, that looks like Trump. It's like, so were we to believe Trump was actually writing these envelopes out himself? I mean,
oh my gosh, yes.
So
no. So, all right, Donald, take us home with this. Now, if anyone out there wants to follow you, wants to read more about you online or buy the books, where can they go?
Well, my blog is Keeping It Unreal. It's donaldjeffries.wordpress.com. My book's Hidden History, Survival of the Richest. I have 2 more coming out next year. I'll be promoting out quite a bit. They're 3 of them are by Skyhorse Publishing, and one's going to be by Trine Day next year, later in the year. But so you can find me on Amazon, in Barnes and Noble stores most of the time. I do lots of interviews. I write now. I write for the American Free Press. And hopefully Deep Truth Journal is going to be coming out there soon. Find my writing in that. Lou Rockwell publishes some of my stuff online, and I hope to have my own. I'm seriously trying to get off my own podcast, which I hope to be able to do fairly soon if I can figure out how to do it. I have some people that are perhaps helping me, so hopefully I'll be able to do something like that, and it'll be myself, maybe some guests sometimes. So, but I'm easy to find on the internet.
And this is Donald Jeffries. He's always kind to us, always does a great job. Donald, thank you so much for being on again.
Well, thanks for having me, ST. It's always a pleasure.
I'm ST Patrick. This is the Midnight Rider News Show, and we'll be right back.
This is Ray Raphael, author of Founding Myths and a People's History of the American Revolution. For more on Washington, Hamilton, Jefferson, Revere, and the truth of America's founding fathers, listen to episode 76 of the Midnight Riders News Show. That's right, 76, as in 1776.
Before my final thoughts tonight, I'd like to give part of the listenership a retro apology.
If I were going to create the perfect place, I'd start with the north. I would carve out rivers and rolling hills, then ride the moon south and warm the skies with a tropical sun. I would dot the West with little hometowns and fill the East with excitement. Right in the middle, I put a great big playground. I would surround it all with water from coast to coast to coast, and I'd give it a name, Florida.
Now see, doesn't that sound nice? But here's the thing. I don't hate Florida and I don't hate Floridians. I mean, that would be ridiculous, and I know that. I spent a lot of time in Florida, close to 15 years, and by and large, almost everyone I met was nice. Very genuinely nice. But it does seem like every crazy story you hear comes from Florida, and you can almost predict it. A man today ate another man's face off after overdosing on synthetic marijuana. And I stop. Wait for it. On a Fort Lauderdale street today, there it is, Florida. But the real problem isn't that the most random acts of insanity occur in your peninsula. I mean, you're trapped. The problems, okay, the real problems, and I'm being sincere here now, stem from the thing that also makes it a desirable state. Florida is fun, Florida is sun, Florida is amusing and amusement. And because of that, a lot of people move to Florida each year. Every single year. These are non-Floridians, and there are parts of Hernando County that literally sound more like Long Island South than the South. You get it a lot, you know. Where are you from? Oh, Michigan, Ohio, New York, New Jersey, a lot from Canada. And at some point I noticed that the answers weren't west of the Mississippi River. I really think they go to Arizona. But think about this. What binds a small town in Illinois or Idaho or Maine? There's a shared history there, and every living generation in the family went to the same high school. You know the mayor. You went to school with the police force, and by that I mean all of them. You know the business owners, and because of this, you have a vested interest in making your community the best it can be for your children. And just like technology, when the turnover is great, the tangible becomes disposable. Who wants to pay more for a city park when your family probably won't even be in the same town in 5 years? Florida is a hit-and-run state. And yes, I get that bothers no one more than Floridians who do want to establish roots there or who have established roots there. And let's be honest, you know, the drug problem across the country is destructive right now, but it's been an epidemic in Florida for decades. Do we need to remind you that Miami Vice was set in Miami for a reason? So yes, the beaches are luxurious, and yes, you have a lot of options for college students. Yes, your high school international baccalaureate programs are strong, they're amazing. And yes, I personally love the Krabby Bill seafood chain that, last I checked, still exists in Tampa and Orlando, and Disney World, SeaWorld, and Busch Gardens all speak for themselves. And there are 1,000 more things that I can name that I love about Florida. But we have to admit, don't we, that the same things that drew you or your parents or grandparents also draw the drifters and addicts and the get-rich-quick schemes that maybe exist there more than any other state. You do live in a tough state. And it's almost like, to get the sun, in turn, you have to be on high alert so often and for so many reasons, natural and man-made. So, do I hate Florida and Floridians? No. I mean, absolutely not. All the kidding I do is just that. I'm just joking, honestly. But I can't stop that or it wouldn't be me. But we also have to admit that there are some unique problems there that I'm afraid to say are now just part of the culture of being Floridian. But I can't leave you all on a bad note, and I won't. So, Floridians, this is for you, from the other side of the mountain, on the best side of midnight. I wish you peace.
Florida. When the last leaf of autumn has fallen to the ground, and the icy wind through the empty trees makes a howling sound, at first it drives you indoors, and then it drives you mad. That's when you know you need it, and you know you need it bad. You say it every summer, what makes it go so fast? And later on you wonder what makes the winter last, while the springtime you've been waiting for never comes somehow. That's when you know you need it, and you know
Contact ST Patrick by email at midnightridernews@gmail.com. Join us on Facebook at Midnight Rider News Show. Follow ST Patrick on Twitter at MWN_ST Patrick. We are LinkedIn at S.T. Patrick. And don't forget to follow Midnight Rider News on your YouTube, iTunes, Stitcher Radio, and many of your favorite podcast providers. This has been a production of MidnightRiderNews.com and ST Patrick. Copyright 2018. All rights reserved. We'll see you next time, and be good to the night.